Asian Literature and Art Festival, or SALA as it's popularly known, proudly produced by Art Forum SF. This festival is special because of you, because you chose to be here, to listen and to celebrate South Asian voices. A heartfelt thank you to all our sponsors for making this Literature and Art Festival a reality. Their dedication to supporting writers, artists, and the exchange of ideas keeps creativity alive in our community. Quick housekeeping rules: please silence your phone and no recordings. Everything will be on YouTube later, so you can relive the brilliance at your own pace. Also, please make sure that you do not leave any belongings of water bottles or any material behind. There will be a 15-minute Q&A after the session, followed by book signing by the author in the Florence Moore Courtyard by the bookstore, right outside. And lastly, as a volunteer-run organization, we at SALA are deeply grateful to all our volunteers, without whose support none of this would be possible. So let's dive in, open our hearts and minds, and enjoy the stories that remind us how art connects us all. The topic of today's discussion is the flow of their ink, in which our keynote speakers, Thrity, Umrigar and Dorabji, are in conversation with Sandhya Gajjar. Sandhya Gajjar is based in Vadodara, also known as Baroda in India, curator and art historian. Sandhya Gajjar has spent the last 35 years researching and writing about the work of artists from the region. She's especially interested in young, emerging artists of promise, especially those from small town India. Baroda's vibrant artistic community is due in part to the presence of the prestigious Baroda Art School, which is an institution of choice for many aspiring artists. Gajjar is contributing correspondent from Baroda for such art magazines such as Art India, Art and Deal, and many others. She's also written for the Times of India, the Indian Express, the Sunday Observer, and the Economic Times. In addition to art writing, Gajjar has also curated a number of art exhibitions in India and the UK. And with that, let's welcome our panelists.
Good afternoon, friends, and thank you very much for that introduction. Welcome back, audience. After that invigorating Tadka or Chalk session with Dr. Abhijit Banerjee, where the discussion centered around cooking, gender, and economic development. From that talk, we will pick up the issue of gender and take it forward here. We are in the session enigmatically titled The Flow of Their Ink. And as we discuss the powerful fiction of Thrity, Umrigar and Dorabji, we will see how their ink flows single-mindedly, building up the strong women characters in their novels who stand up in the face of extreme mental and physical trauma and come out winners. And we will appreciate how and why their writing has won them many prestigious awards. Welcome to the session. Some of you may have read their books, others may have only read or heard about them. We hope that I certainly hope that after this discussion you might be interested in reading more about their books, and if so, both the authors and their books will be available for book signing immediately afterwards. In a nutshell, however, let me tell you what their works have in common and ways in which they are both quite unlike each other. For one thing, both belong to the Parsi community. Thrity is a true blue Parsi, while Tara's father is Parsi and mother is German Italian. For today's audience who may not be aware of this history, the Parsis are believed to have been refugees persecuted for their religion from Persia, who escaped by boats along with their sacred fire and landed on the Gujarat coastline, first near Diu and from there sailed to Sanjan near Surat, on the western coast. The local ruler welcomed them and the refugees blended like sugar in milk. And since the last many centuries have continued to be an extremely productive but unfortunately a dwindling minority community in India, never looking for freebies. In fact, Thrity has written a book, Sugar and Milk, that was published in 2021. Thrity has been publishing for almost the last 25 years and has more than 10 books to her credit. I have read 3 of them. 2 of them, The Space Between Us and The Museum of Failures, are situated in Mumbai, Bombay, a major Parsi stronghold in which Parsi families, and especially the women, are central to the narrative. The third book, Everybody's Son, is situated in the US and explores the acerbic racial tensions along towns on the eastern coast and the Georgia south, though here the men are comparatively reign supreme. On the other hand, Tara's only novel, Her Name is Freedom, is situated in beautiful Kashmir, torn or rather ripped apart by insurgency, turning it into militarized zones. Here too, it is the women who bear the brunt of the different kinds of violence caused by situations within and outside the home. And it is their resilience and foresightedness that keep their families together and conjure up for them the strength to go on and dream about a happier, peaceful future. So Thrity, let me begin with you. From amongst contemporary literature from the Indian subcontinent, we are familiar with stories where the city plays an important role, often becoming a character in itself, influencing the narrative. In your novels, The Museum of Failures and The Space Between Us, Mumbai and its sprawl that includes its vast slums, the elite South Bombay district, the upper middle class Parsi families in their Parsi bags, and the muggy, muddled Arabian Sea registers its presence emphatically. Am I right in making this assumption? And if so, could we discuss this a bit? How do you make a city into a character?
It's a great question, and I thank you, not just for the question, but I thank you for your presence here today. For those of you who don't know, Sandhya literally flew in just to moderate this panel a few days ago, and to my utter shock, I just found out she's flying back home to India on Tuesday. So maybe start by giving the true So, anyway, so your question about making the city a character, it's actually quite easy when you're writing about a city like Bombay. I have always thought and said that, you know, you don't even, if you're not already a writer when you visit Bombay, let's say, you will become a writer by the time you leave, because it feels like there are great stories just floating in the air, and all the writer has to do is pluck one and then spend the next 2 years of their life, you know, devoted to writing that story. You are absolutely right in your observation about the sea, the Arabian Sea. As somebody who grew up in Bombay and lived there until I was 21 and came to this country, my happiest memories of my childhood and teenage years all are centered around being close to the water or being on the water. There is something fantastic just about the vastness of any ocean or any sea, but more than that, it was the one part of Bombay, and I dare say India, where the class differences that are so prevalent in everyday life, and that certainly haunted my childhood from a very young age. We were upper middle class in a desperately poor city, and it was a contradiction that I have never been able to come to terms with, not even today. But if Bombay genuinely is a melting pot, the place where you see that manifested is by the seaside in the evenings. You know, it just feels like the entire city pours out into those lovely promenades along Marine Drive and Worli and Chowpatty Beach and all these places. And, you know, somebody from Cuff Parade, the rich part of town, would rub shoulders with somebody who has just come from a slum, you know. So I was thinking of this the other day. I think the vast majority of my novels will at least feature one scene or the other that's set by the seaside. And the other reason for, you know, this, I mean, and this is tangential to your question about the city as a character, but one of the reasons I think that every novel features life by the seaside so very much is I'm cheating a little bit. You know, I haven't lived in India ever since I left as a young adult, and as is true for any society, things change. I mean, language changes, certainly pop culture changes, politics change, and I haven't stayed truly abreast of any of those things. But there are also things that are timeless. Sunsets, you know, sunsets on the water. Again, the sense of the whole city sort of coming together, at least for those 2 hours each evening. And I like to write about those timeless things. One, simply because they are timeless, but two, it also allows me to keep going back and writing about India, because I'm not writing about things that are changing from day to day, year to year. I'm writing about the timeless things.
Thank you, Rebecca. So in all the 3 books which I read, I mean, you've written many more, but that was all I could manage in the last 1 month, including Everybody's Son, which I find is an amazing novel. The family plays the most important role, with the women in their own way working around to lessen the control wrought by the elements of patriarchy, whether it is within or whether it is outside the family. Sometimes when the men are gentle, as in the case of the father-in-law in the book The Space Between Us, Sarah's father-in-law, it is the mother-in-law who takes on the role of a shrew, the alternate patriarch. Right? At the same time, Sarah Dubash, the second central character of the book, who otherwise comes across as a large-hearted, warm woman, suddenly does a complete turnaround when confronted with the truth, revealing that when it comes to survival, a woman, as good as a man perhaps, could easily knock another one out. So who is really the strong character here?
You know, that truly does change from book to book, and it's always, I mean, in my personal life, I'm a political person. I have strong opinions, strong value systems, strong beliefs about things. But if I'm doing my job right, I would leave the reader guessing as to what I truly believe. Because when you're writing a book, you're not writing about yourself. If you're writing about yourself, call it a memoir, and that's fine. But when you're writing fiction, your primary, your first, second, and last loyalty is to the story itself. It's to the novel itself, and it is to your characters, right? So if the story calls for a strong character, it doesn't really matter to me if that's male or female. Everything in a book should be in service of the book itself, you know? I'm not trying to make political statements per se in any of my books. I mean, if it registers as that, then so be it. But that is truly not my primary goal, you know? And speaking of strong characters, yes, in some ways, Sarah Dubash, the upper middle class woman in Space Between Us, she is a strong character, but the strongest character in that book is the other female, is Bhima, who works as a domestic servant in Sarah's home. Because the challenges that Bhima faces, I dare say Sarah would just wilt away in a day's time if she had to live that life, which is true. If any of you grew up in India, I think it's true for many of us, right? I mean, we can flatter ourselves as much as we want, but the true heroes of India are the working class people, and many of whom work in our homes for very little money, and certainly very little respect. I guess that's all I was saying. Yeah. I want to hear from Tara.
Yeah, no, Tara, I believe, Tara, you did a lot of ground research in Kashmir. You know, Tara's written a book on Kashmir, which is really fantastic, absolutely. And we have so little work on Kashmir available with us in India also. So are any of the characters in the book, which are got some really fantastic characters, modeled seriously on any of the people you might have met or interacted with over there?
So I love this question, and really agree with Thrity. It's when you're writing fiction, you're not basing it on specific people, it can be inspired by it, but the story takes over and the characters come to you. And so in the research for this novel, I went to Kashmir, Srinagar, the Indian occupied portion of it, and was deeply inspired by the stories. And one of the women I met, she was telling me, her father was killed and when she was growing up. And she said that she wanted to become a militant to avenge him initially. And she knew who the perpetrator was. He was in the army, but there was nothing she could do. And as she grew older, she realized, working with human rights groups, that picking up a gun wouldn't do anything. And so she actually took up the cause. There were 2 villages that were gang raped by the Indian Army, and those cases weren't being brought forward. And so she became an advocate to bring these cases forth. And that was a way that she was able to find justice. And so, she was this young powerhouse of a woman, and that story got me in my core, and that's one of the reasons I took up documentary film, because I wanted to hear it from her. Now her resilience, the way she sits, all of that starts to imbibe the story. But it's very important to let the story tell itself and not to try to take control of the characters. They'll tell you where they want to go.
Yeah. Yes, they do. Yeah, and I think one of those characters is Noorjahan, isn't she? So I was really fascinated by that character, the way she takes control of her own life and plans the future of her daughter. I think that was fantastic. Her little daughter Aisha, when she's still in school, to make sure that she is economically independent when she grows up. And Noorjahan's knowledge of medicinal herbs in her immediate environment, that's almost magical, I think. The way she is able to cure illnesses of all kinds and help women in childbirth and all of that. That is amazing. And then her death and her reappearance as a ghost. That is fantastic. How did you think of her?
Nora called to me. So she's one of the few characters I don't write from her perspective, because she's just so complex. And she does hold that wisdom as a healer, as a midwife, but she's also a businesswoman. And she doesn't have a whole lot of access. And so a lot of the story is, to your point, how does she do this for her daughter? And how does she both teach her daughter the old ways, but in a post-colonial land, give her daughter the tools to survive? So one of them is education. And then she's like, how do I get the land to my daughter? The laws don't do this. So she finds different ways, because we know the status of women and capacity. Like, if you don't have access to land, if you don't have access to education, those are the things. And so you can see in the novel over the generations the shifts and the sacrifices and the way that they try, and sometimes it works. And so that was part of the story that unfolded. And again, with this writing, initially I started sort of a cloaked autobiography. It was going to be taking place in Bombay, where my dad came from, to the Bay Area, and then these other voices came through. That story became an essay. Where it belonged, and I started to listen. And Noorjahan had a lot of secrets. So I would ask her questions, but one thing that was clear was her love for her daughter. And so at the heart, there is this mother-daughter story, and what are the inheritance that we want for our daughters? And what are the sacrifices that we really have to make? And in that way, Noor Jahan was very complex, and difficult situations made difficult choices, but unwavering in her love and fierceness.
No, she is an amazing character, that woman, really. I also, the book, I couldn't get the copy of the book in India because it's not available in India. Finally, the SALA people managed to contact her publisher, and that person sent me a PDF, and I read it on my computer. So the thing is, she uses an amazing technique. The book is divided into very small chapters, and each chapter carries the name of a person in the book, the character in the book, and it just moves from Alim to Aisha to Nurjan to so and so and so and so. Can you tell us a little bit about how you came across? This is a fantastic literary technique. This is what I've.
Yeah, one of the things that I was looking at is the parallel of the militarization of the land. And when you look at a deep conflict, and this book is inspired by the independence movement in Kashmir, you have to look at it with a post-colonial framework. And the land changes, the community changes, the culture changes. So how do you tell this story? And so in that way, the land becomes an architect for the story, and then the people moving through it. And so it became important to capture the different voices. And there is a third person close, but a little bit omniscient, and that became very important because I think that some of the deepest truths we have come through the conflicts that we experience with one another. And a lot of times it's an attempt to lie to each other, a lot of times it's an attempt to lie to ourselves, and we can start seeing the truth when you see the different perspectives butting up against each other. And so for the complexity of the story, it was essential to carry different points of view, but really root them in the land.
Yeah, that I found that a very, very powerful kind of a literary technique in which to take the story forward. So though it is very obvious that the ground of conflict is Kashmir, you have coined very interesting imaginative names for this fictionalized lands against which the story starts developing. So these fictionalized lands of India, of Pakistan occupied Kashmir, or what she says, India occupied Kashmir, etc. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, and I think Thrity spoke beautifully to the importance of place as character. And when you put a place as character, you don't get to fictionalize certain things. It exists. You have to be able to go there and know it with a certain intimacy. And so particularly, I started with the village being fictionalized because I thought it's not fair for a place to have to carry this story. But the more I sat with it, the more that I realized to tell the story effectively, particularly as someone living in the United States who has visited Kashmir, that I needed to create realities that were inspired by the current reality and geography and carries many of the culture and legacy, but that we could have as its own world and create a world. And as I did that, it also, I think, allows us to see the similarities and struggles in other post-colonial places. And even here, right? We're sitting on occupied land. This was indigenous land, then it was Mexico. Now you have people here who are of the land, but they don't have papers and they can't work. And it very similar thing in Kashmir for Muslims in India. These are things that are part of a larger story of post-colonial rule and neoliberalism that we're living through. And so by taking the actual specific setting out, I was able to draw those parallels in ways that otherwise I might not have been able to. And also, I think it's important to talk about the reality of book bannings that are happening. And there's actually a section in the book where it's an older woman, she has a bookstore, and this young reporter, he's asking her, like, why did you open the bookstore? And she's like, well, they can snap our internet but it's harder to go home to home. And at the same time right now you have that images of soldiers going bookstore to bookstore to bookstore in Kashmir because of the banned books, actually physically taking them out of the spaces. And so when you speak truth, there is a deep consequence to that in terms of state-sponsored violence and control of the narrative.
Sounds familiar to us too.
So there is an evocative quote, I love this quote actually, where Aisha tells her husband Alim, who is an artist, she tells him to paint the rivers. And she says, and this is in quotes, "The beauty of the waters is that it knows no borders. It flows across nations. Paint the rivers." This reflects really very beautifully with the theme of this year's SALA, which is Thoughts Without Borders. Would you like to elaborate on this?
I mean, the water knows no boundaries and it flows between nations. And I think we can learn a lot from the rivers when we look at them. Just like when we remove the dams, what happens with the actual ecosystem. And, you know, when you look at the independence of India and Pakistan, that was one of the largest land migrations in human history. And it was a very specific strategy to have communities turn on each other. And the rivers remind us how to get along, you know, and it's, you know, as you said, the other part of my lineage is from Germany. So Germany was cut in half, but has already been reunited. And then you look at Europe, they have their own culture, languages, but they've gotten together, they have the EU, because that gives economic control, right? But when we look at our homelands, we've been carved up, and that fight remains ingrained from a colonial force, and it's this opportunity to come together. We can still have our own unique languages and culture, but there has to be a way to work together effectively in that reunification. And so I think the rivers offer the way to do that in a very real way as they flow through. That's the reminder, I believe.
So all creative persons, I think, dip into personal life experiences to germinate what eventually becomes a story, a poem, a play, a painting, or a piece of dance. So though Thrity, you left India at the age of 21, which would be sometime in the mid-1980s, I guess, yeah. It certainly appears that India has not left you. Her very first book, Bombay Time, printed in 2001, dealt with life in a Bombay apartment occupied largely by Parsi families. From the 3 books we are looking at today, The Space Between Us was published in 2006, Everybody's Son in 2017, and Museum of Failures, a latest book, in 2023. I find that in this book, and I find the name really intriguing, and you must tell us how you hit upon it, the Museum of Failures. Okay? Your ability to build a tight narrative around a life-altering betrayal, that's from the book, Life-Altering Betrayal, leading to a crescendo of the final curtain is really superbly executed in that book. Can you share some of the challenges you met and overcome in this journey of writing for 25 years?
Oh, of 25 years?
Yes.
Well, I'll tackle the easier question first, the title for the book. So a few years before I actually wrote the book, I was reading the New York Times, and there was an article about the actual physical Museum of Failure that was located, I believe, in Sweden at that time. And the idea was very intriguing. I mean, it was literally a museum built to failed ideas. Yeah, celebrate failures, failed innovations, failed products. I'm sure the ghost of the new Coke, remember that, was probably floating around somewhere. You know, I was intrigued, as I suppose most readers would have been, by what a great idea for a museum. But what, of course, grabbed my heart was what it was called. And I immediately thought this would be a great title for a novel someday. So I kind of just remembered it and squirreled away the name, and every few years I'd look over my shoulder to see if another writer had beat me to it, you know, and was going to name their new novel that. I didn't come across that, so I started work on this book, which simply tells the story of this young 30-something Parsi man who lives in the States, very successful, and goes home to adopt a baby. And we find that he has always had a very conflicted relationship with his mom, who is still in India. And there's a scene where at one point he's walking, again, along the water, late in the evening, and sort of ruminating about his life and thinking about, you know, mostly thinking about the sadness of his childhood because of his mom. And he suddenly thinks of the entire city as a museum of failures. You know, he's projecting, of course, you know, his vision of the city and the sadness that it holds for him that he has left behind by escaping to America. You know, colors his idea of the whole city, and he kind of sees it as a museum of failures. So you want me to talk about my own failures for the last 25 years?
No, certainly
What's
not.
bigger than a museum?
Well, actually, a failure which later you grew out to make a success, that would be excellent. I would like you to talk about it. But why I asked this particular question is that in my last few years of coming to SALA and talking with the authors, I found that many in the audience are also aspiring. They may not have written a word, but they want to, you know. And I think I put in this question often to the writers I am on a panel with, because you see some of the hints they give, or some of the little, you know, little tips, exactly, are extremely useful to the writers, and that may really be your, you know, stepping stone, you know, to something which you actually go out and do. Write your poem, write your essay, write your book or little short story to begin with, you know, that's why.
So I'll answer this in two parts, and the honest answer is I have not had a lot of conventional failures in terms of my career. No, it was just a matter of dumb luck. I'm just going to be perfectly honest with you. The way I got my first book published was I used to be a reporter. I had a fellowship to Harvard for a year. I had already started work on that book before I got the fellowship, but I was also working part-time on a PhD while I was working full-time as a journalist. So I had put the book away, applied for the fellowship, secretly hoping and planning that I would have time, you know, that daily life would not allow, to work on the novel and get that done. While I was still in that year, I ran into a woman who approached me based on a question. I had attended a small, it wasn't even a literary festival, it was just a poetry reading by somebody in Boston. I had gone to that, asked a question during the Q&A, totally common question, you know, nothing brilliant about the question, but somehow this woman approached me, said, I'm an agent based in Boston, are you a writer? And I just looked at her like, do you have wings or something? Like, where did you appear from, you know? Long story short, that's how I got the contract for my first novel. Okay, it is not the typical success. I mean, it's not the typical. Yeah, it's not a struggle story. It is not the way most people. I just got lucky. There's no two ways about it. I can take zero credit for this, other than the fact that I was working. You know, if she could have approached me with the same question, and if I said, well, I want to be a writer, or I have a great idea for a book, but I haven't done any work on it, that would have been a failure, right? I want to say one more thing. The failures that I have had, though, have all been self-generated. And the biggest failure, I truly believe this, is the failure of imagination. You know, there is nothing you can achieve in life if you don't see it first. You have to be able to see it here, you know. And there were many, many years, you know, I was almost 40 years old when my first book was published. I probably could have written that same book at least a decade earlier, but I couldn't see myself as a published writer. I was somebody who started writing like hate poems to my parents when I was 5 years old, you know? So it's not like I didn't know how to write. I have always been a writer, but I just didn't have the self-confidence to think someone like me could be on a stage like this, right? And that is the most poisonous failure of them all, is the failure of imagination. So if any of you are aspiring writers, the only way to be a writer is to do one thing, write. Don't talk about it to other people, don't think about it, don't dream about it. Put your butt in that chair and begin to write. Thank you.
Both of our authors today are working on new novels. So I would like you both to talk about the new work.
Yeah, and for me, it's been a long journey publishing. So I just say, to sort of counterbalance that, it took me 14 years to bring Call Her Freedom into the world. My daughters were 4 when I started, and 18 the year that it was published. So, some of it takes time in different ways, and also I would say, for me being on this panel with Thrity is such an honor as a young woman being able to read your work. And what you're talking about is the imagination and the possibility. Like for you, you had to imagine it. For me, you made it possible by the work that you did. And so in that way, my work is an homage to yours and wouldn't be born in the same way without it. And I think that's part of the writing too, is that willingness to give back to others and create that community. So having a community for me has been vital, and the biggest joy is being able to work with other writers and support their work, because they're gonna get where I couldn't, because you can just see further when someone else has already done it. And so that's been a big part of it. I am working on my second novel, and it takes place here in the Bay Area, and it's about a young woman coming of age. Her parents work at the Livermore Nuclear Weapons Lab, and she starts to unravel secrets. And the story's told over, a small time period of maybe 100 years. So also looking at technology and a relationship from the atomic bomb through AI, and that's social change. So I'm kind of deep in that right now, but just sent a full draft out for review, so we'll see when it comes into the world.
I have a book coming out in January. This is not the actual book, it's just the galley. I brought it as a gift for Sandhya, who may or may not have it, I don't know. Here it is. So I don't know if you guys will be able to see this, but I was telling an 84-year-old friend of mine in Ohio that this is my first book that has blood on the jacket. And this is a friend who is addicted to British murder mysteries, and she sort of screwed up her nose and said, "That's not enough blood." But all of which is to say that it's my first mystery novel, I guess, and I'm sort of hesitant to call it that because it's actually a book that pretends to be a mystery novel as a way of getting to talk about the world of social media, of political repression, all the things that, we are living in, post-COVID, pre-COVID. It's actually set in 2019, so it's pre-COVID. But it's an examination of how life for minorities can be today under the guise of the classic woman disappears, partner is left behind. In this case, the partner happens to be, it's a gay couple, and the partner is the she's Muslim and the daughter of immigrants. So talk about a triple whammy, and all the wrath of society and all the suspicion of society sort of descends on her. So, it's set in Trump's first administration, and like I said, it's just about 6 months before COVID hits. So that's all.
Great.
It won't come out till January.
Okay.
January. What's the name? It's called Missing Sam.
Missing Sam. Missing Sam. Sam as in Uncle Sam. It's two. An extent. Sam as in. Tara, your interest has also been in making documentary films on human rights, and you have already award-winning documentaries to your credit. So can you tell us a little more about that before we wind up?
So it's actually the novel called Her Freedom that led me to the filmmaking. So when I was in Srinagar in 2018, the stories were so powerful, the access is so limited, that I was like, let's do some short form film. And one of the reasons I wanted to do it is because there's beautiful films coming out of Kashmir by Kashmiris that are phenomenal and not always accessible to the international audience. And there's something about short form and people's space to uptake. And so I just had that idea. I was there for doing novel research. I'm like, okay, let's try making films. And so that's how I became a filmmaker, and worked very much with the community groups in terms of identifying what was the content they wanted covered. And so they're difficult. I mean, the first film is a short film on torture, state-sponsored, and we released it at the same time that the Human Rights Group released a major report on torture from the region. And so it was a way to give their campaign more dialogue with civil society. And I'm actually working on the third film right now, Call Me Azadi, in post-production, very slow, and that's about the human rights defenders and why they stand up. And I'd say one of the most difficult parts about working on the film is one of the young journalists who is in this film was actually incarcerated, Irfan Mehraj, 2 years ago for his work as an artist, as a reporter. And so to see the seizure of that work and how, it was so bad when I was there, but the repression has taken hold at a whole different level. And so that opportunity and responsibility that we also have, an agency when we're not in the land to amplify and support those stories, is one of the things that's really motivated me in the filmmaking as well as in the writing.
So thank you very much, Thrity and Tara. It was lovely chatting with you here today. And thank you, audience, for choosing to hear what they had to say. And thank you, SALA, for this wonderful opportunity for bringing us all together. Thank you and God bless. And if there are any questions, we are ready to take them.
Hi, thank you very much for all of you for coming. It really is very meaningful. So my question is to all of you. Thrity, in your end of the book for Spaces Between Us, you talk about tips to writers. And you say it's kind of like you're in a fixer-upper house and it takes as long as it takes. But my question to you all is, because I'm a panzer writer and I have rewritten my book several times, and the part that always gets me is the point of view of the novel. Third person omniscient, first person close, a combination of which I have gone through many drafts and I finally settled on something, but I wanted to hear from all of you how you handle that issue, because when you're in a house, you can look from so many different perspectives.
So first of all, I don't remember saying that. I'm not sure it's a very good analogy, but the book is old and I was younger, so. Okay, so do you not hear it in a certain voice? Do you? You hear certain passages in a certain voice? And do you hear the whole book in the same narrative voice? Well, then why don't you respect that? I know, I mean, rhetorical question, of course, but see, I'm an instinctive writer. I mean, I teach writing. I teach at the university, but when it comes to writing your own work, respect what you're hearing. You know, the book is talking to you. I mean, yes, you are writing the book, narrating the book, but the book is also narrating itself to you. And the other thing, I mean, so that's a little esoteric perhaps, but the other thing I would say is it is really essential to try and find, especially if you live in the Bay Area, where I assume the opportunities are greater, is to find a cohort of fellow writers, you know, where you meet once a month or, you know, and look at each other's work. That will give you feedback that is absolutely invaluable to have. You know, so if you can, and if you don't know where to find it, you know, some universities have groups, bookstores have groups. Really find fellow writers whose work you will respect to give you feedback on yours. That's really essential. Do not send it out, obviously, until you are sure of the voice of your book. Voice is probably, it's an intangible thing, but it's one of the most important things, you know. And I always love reading books that mix it up a little bit, that have multiple points of view.
And I'll co-sign on the community of writers. I think that's the most essential part and the most rewarding, because they're your friends and you go through so much. My writing group is my most stable thing. We've seen regimes come and go, you know, jobs have come and gone, partners have, but the writing group still meets, so I would say that's an essential. And I too am an intuitive exploratory writer, and also that takes time. So I say try it, throw it in first person, throw it in second person, do third person close, maybe a little bit of omniscient here and there, and then try different things on, see how it works. Takes more time, you don't have to write the whole thing in it, but you can write passages. When I get blocked, I write in first person, flip it back to third. You know, when I got to my editor at Simon & Schuster, she's like, okay, well, let's take it down to the structure. And she's like, why don't you try something omniscient? I was like, I don't think you're allowed to do that. I thought you had to do third person close. That's what you do in the US market. She's like, why don't you try it? See what you do. And that like opened up the text in a way that I could get a layer of complexity I couldn't otherwise. And even the novel that I'm starting now that switches POV a lot, the point of discovery is important too. What's the time frame, right? And so when I started writing it, it was like 2018 was my time because that's when we were in. And now it's like I'm exploring like 2060. So these changes take time, but I don't think you have to limit yourself. And so the excitement is to try the different parts, and just because you haven't seen it done in that way doesn't mean that that's not the structure for your novel. And then once you find it, make it consistent, build the contract with the reader, like get it clear. But it's part of the journey in it and the discovery, which is really exciting.
Yeah, so I haven't written any novel as yet, so I haven't done that. I do other kinds of writing, which are very different. But I would go with, I think if you get an opportunity, do read her book, because the way she has chapterized them with the name of the character itself, you know, that makes it very simple. Am I right? That makes it very simple. And of course, just because it is the name of the character is the title of that particular chapter, does not mean that it's only about that character. But that character's thoughts are the most prominent in that particular chapter. So you've also got to identify that how are you going to build up characters as your novel or story progresses, and how much time are you going to, in time I would say words or pages, etc. are you going to allot to them? Because sometimes you can go overboard and then the reader has lost track of what the hell you're trying to say. So you've got to be very careful about that. That is very important. And I would say, if you start writing, whatever you want to write about, the Substack on the internet is a very good opportunity, because you get a lot of, if you cannot find this cohort, you get a lot of inputs from them. You've done this well, you've not done this well, you've done the last one better, and this was the way I found it better, etc. to get feedback. That is what I found.
So when they were talking, I just realized I have done something like this for this book that's going to come out in January. So the chapters are told from the perspective of the two women at the heart of the story, and those are in the first person. Yeah. But then there's a third character, and I had written him in the third person also. And my editor, because of the subject matter, she just thought, no, it's too close. I don't want to see or hear that much from this guy. I don't want to give him that much voice in the book. And she said, why don't you try writing him in the third person? And I was like, how is that going to look? How is that going to work? But it was a challenge, and I decided to try it. And it just clicked. I think that third person section, it's a short section in the middle of the book, I actually think is now my favorite voice in the book. So Tara is absolutely right. Play around with this. Play around with voice.
Hi, thank you for taking my question right here. So I have a high schooler. My daughter is actually so thrilled that I'm here, but very sad that she can't be. So she asked me to ask a question. So her passion is English and journalism. I think the only person in her school who still believes in true journalism and research and not using AI in her English writing. Her question is, how can I... Pardon me?
Can I adopt her?
Yes, please. And my question is, how do we inspire our young people to pursue English and journalism and to write on behalf of those who are unseen, unheard, and overlooked?
I feel like we should be asking you that question, because you've obviously done something right? So whatever you've done to create a wonderful daughter like this is something that we should all learn from you, rather than asking me, or even, I don't want to speak for Tara, but she probably has something brilliant to say about this, so here goes.
It's beautiful, so thank your daughter for the question. And I have teenage daughters, mine are 18, and I think that one of the things that's been powerful is also giving them the stage, handing them the mic. I used to work for Youth Speaks, and that's a local poetry slam, and we'd say, because the next generation can speak for themselves. And so I do think that there's a power in letting young people share their stories, hear it, lift it up. And then also, I think it's important to connect it with the legacy of the mentors and those who have been doing the work, and that it takes on new forms. And so, there's this amazing group of, they're twins, and they do storytelling. They just got a fellowship at Harvard, the World with MNR, I think it is, and they just they do these 3-minute videos amplifying young Muslim women and also stories from Kashmir, all over Pakistan. And it's just such bold storytelling that combines the legacy of storytelling, but also new media. And so I think also connecting young women with the young women who are doing this work bravely and unafraid in new mediums is a powerful way to inspire them as well.
Any more questions? Yeah. Please give the mic.
Thank you all so much. I want to say your daughter's in good company. I work with a lot of students, and there's still hope out there, and they're working hard. So I'm a musician and an author, and I did this wackadoodle thing a couple years ago, which was to buy manuscript staff paper, music paper, to journal in every morning. And I was 97% sure I was crazy, but then in the last 2 years I have been writing differently because I clearly accessed other stuff in my brain. Are there wackadoodle things y'all do that maybe you thought, this is nuts and I'm gonna do it? Thank you.
I mean, I think that being uncomfortable is important. So one of the ways that I've stretched myself recently is dance. I'm not a great dancer. Choreography is terrible. So I've been doing rhythm and motion at the Yerba Buena Gardens, which is a public space. So like not only stretching myself to embody, but also like publicly to learn something. I think we feel specialized sometimes and we want to focus on what we do because we do it well. So I think it's important to have those moments. I mean, even doing things like TikTok videos with my daughters, like be silly, be fun, get out of your comfort zone.
I think the better question for me is the 5 days of my life when I haven't done wackadoodle stuff. So, but no, I think as it pertains to writing, the thing that immediately comes to mind is, you know, I write in public spaces. I mean, I'll go to the library or I'll go to a coffee shop or whatever, and I act out my characters. I mean, not like voices and like not huge movements, but you know, because it's really hard for me after all these years to write a sequence of actions, you know? Like the build up to, I'm just making this up, but somebody throwing a punch, but everything that leads to that moment, it's hard for me to like choreograph that in my brain, and I always have to act out both roles, so to speak. And there have been instances when, you know, people that are not like close friends, but people who know me in the community have just tiptoed past me when they've seen me, and then months later I'll run into them at a reading or something, and they'll be like, "You write at such and such coffee shop, right?" And I'm like, "Yes." And then they tell me why they didn't stop to say hi. So, you know, the man, woman of the coffee shop. So, but that's about it.
As someone who was born in the US, the way that I relate to stories, Indian stories, is very different often from like, my parents or friends that were born and still live in India. So for both of you, since I know Thrity, it sounds like you lived in India as a young person, moved away, and both of you have very intersectional identities as it relates to South Asia in general. How do you feel like those different parts of your identity change the way that you approach stories that you've set in India itself?
You know, I know for a fact that some of the books that I've written, some of the stories that I've told, I don't know that I would have been able to tell them. There is something about distance, you know, the distance of time and the distance of space that frees you up in certain ways, you know. And I think, you know, I write a lot, although the themes are different, about that insider-outsider perspective, you know, that double vision or that dual vision of being able to see a society both from both sides. And I'll be honest with you, I've done a lot of panels where, you know, there are fellow writers who are immigrants, and at some point, I almost wait for it. There's always this talk of great angst about belonging to two societies and sort of falling through the cracks at times between the two and all. And I always feel like that's the superpower of anybody who has the advantage of belonging, of calling more than one place home. I mean, in a world where most people, even today, believe it or not, don't travel, who live where they were born or where they've lived most of their lives, the fact that we are privy to, and I don't care if it's because somebody like me, who was an immigrant, or someone like you, who was born in this country, you are still familiar with two cultures, you know? And that to me is like, it makes us probably part of the 5% of people who are lucky to have made movements and shifts like that out of choice in a voluntary way. We're not talking about climate refugees or people who come to a country with the clothes on their back. But I can safely say for those of us in this room right now, we are lucky to have been exposed to different cultures, you know? And I want my writing to reflect that in one way or the other.
Yeah, I believe too that it's a certain gift of being able to live in multiple worlds, and many of us have that. And I think that there can be a fear in it, and there's also a deep responsibility. And so for me, you know, with Kashmir, we're not getting many stories out of there. And so for me to go in, one of the reasons that people would speak to me was because I had a social justice activist background. So they were like, oh, she's an activist too, why are you here? Well, I'm here because I believe in like the independence movement, I want to learn, I'm inspired. And so that opens doors in very specific ways where people share their stories, and it's a gift. And then to think like, how does this work build back into the community? And how can then I work with other storytellers in the region to really catalyze their practice too and build community? And so I think that's a really important part of the process. And for the book I'm working on now, I've been actually working, there's a local garden near me in San Francisco, the Hummingbird Farm, and so I ended up doing a workshop with the summer interns there, and I talked about the themes of my novel, and they were like, oh, this overlays, so we did like AI, futurism, and ancestral wisdom. That was like the workshop that we decided between my book themes and what they were working on in this garden, and so that was amazing to work with these young people and explore plant medicine and like what are the learnings and how can that help us understand this moment we're in terms of social transformation. And so I think there's an opportunity when you're doing fiction and work and research to think about how is the research that I'm doing supporting what the community wants to engage in, and then building a way so more stories are told and more people have access. And then it becomes just like super fun because you're discovering together and you're also building resources in the community, which I think is so important.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the end of the session. But before you go, I just want to inform all of you that SALA has an interesting art exhibition. And you must go and see, because there is one person, there are 2 or 3 people who've done extraordinarily good work there. One of them being Sara Khan, who is an artist of Pakistan-American origin. And she has her take on this whole business of cooking and gender and all is fabulous. You must go and see it. It's something you will really enjoy. Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you for coming.